least we all know better than to blame the user, right?
Yeah? Does that look like a presentation?
Every day we won't get the user experience.
Man, this kind of stinks because my VGA adapter doesn't have a USB for my clicker, so I'm going to click with my laptop. So who here is here because like the AI room was full? Really?
Because it was too warm.
To be...
Because it was too warm.
Oh.
Now, who's cold in here?
Yeah. All right. So this is a 3-hour workshop.
Quiz every 15 minutes.
So I will admit to you guys that you're a bit of a guinea pig for this talk. This was actually extracted from a full-day workshop that I did wean down to a 1-hour talk at one point. So you guys are my first 30, 40-minute talk version of this. So I appreciate your patience. So my name is Matt, and I do a lot of things. I do product consulting, whatever that means, lean, agile, I don't know, pretty much if you pay money, I'll come and help you out do something. I care a lot about work design, which we're going to talk about today. However, organizational change, especially in the enterprise where a lot of my clients live, is really depressing. So I bought a farm, and we currently board horses. So if you're looking to board horses in Concord, I'd love to talk to you later. And I also met a wonderful group of people, and I'm kind of representing or advising as their head of product at a company called Farm Fair. So real quick, I'm kind of curious. Who in here is like a UX designer, UX researcher? Who's a programmer? Any programmers? Any testers? Analysts? Managers? Are there any female founder of ag startups? Any? Always, there's always one. There's always one. All right. So, who works on products? All right, great. 2, 3 people. I seriously don't know. What did I miss? What's a product? Okay, so that's fair. I will say for this talk and most of what I talk or write about, when I say product, I would say products and services is what I mean, but I'm not going to type that every time. So, product services. So, they do 5 things. 3 things, sorry. So, I think, have you guys all, I don't know, have you ever worked with a product or service that you felt was pretty good? You liked it? Okay, how about then, do you know, has there been a product or service you thought like, that was great? And you know it's great because it's significantly better than those ones that you thought were good? Now, anecdotally, do you know anything about the companies that made those products or services that you thought were great? Heard stories?
Yeah.
And is there some aspect of what you maybe know or have heard about that company that you think maybe enables it to have that creative output to make that product great? Is that, see more heads nodding up and down than back and forth. So I will at least then ask you to suspend your disbelief that this is true, and we'll kind of go into sci-fi mode then. So this is kind of my thing. This is kind of where I hang my hat. I think that there's a lot of great things that happen out there. I see a lot of great consultants and coaches and stuff come in, and they help product teams, product managers, product developers figure out how to do better practices and processes and stuff for making good products, and that's great. Who's working at a company or has worked at a company and they're going through some type of a transformation, an agile transformation, a lean transformation, a digital transformation, a cultural transformation? It's all
of the above.
Right?
That's what you were going to say.
It doesn't stick. Now I say
Simultaneously.
that as a seller of agile and lean and product transformations. And I guess some of the digital transformation is just companies that now are realizing that tech enables their business. That's all digital transformation. One interesting thing about agile transformations, by the way, you guys all realize that, who's heard of agile, right? Okay. You guys all know agile is now as old as waterfall was when agile started replacing waterfall? That should make you freak out like a little bit. A little bit. All right. So what is organization design? So this is not boring. So the funny thing is, organization design is a formal area of study. It's been around since the 50s. They studied how coal miners did work in the UK. They've studied some stuff around like how strategy aligns to it. The very first org map was written for the Erie Railroad, so kind of close to home, in something like 1856 or 65 or something like that. So organizational design, I would say, is a subset of social system design, which is a very broad topic. It includes government and lots of other things could be social systems. It's really just how humans group together and interact. So then through the lens of how to make them effectively work in an organization. That could be a business or nonprofit or whatever, but usually the idea is an organization is this thing that has some type of purpose and direction, the thing it's trying to accomplish. And how do the people interact in the social systems do that to help that organization achieve whatever its goals are. But really it just becomes this amorphous area of study, because basically I think organization design just steals from everything else that ends in design and then just figures it how to apply it to business or to organizations. So I've seen strategy design, work design, I've seen information architecture design, so I kind of just throw it in this kind of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so there's a guy named Jay Galbraith that he came up with a star model in the 70s. His thing was a 5-pointed star. And the funny thing about Jay is his model, unfortunately, is still sort of the leading work that we have on what organizational design is inclusively. Because I'm a consultant, so I have to make up my own thing, and I'm tired of quadrant models. Have you ever noticed every consultant has a quadrant model? So I've got a hexagon. It's measurably better than a quadrant model. Something is entering power saving. Oh, it's just the screen, not mine. Okay. So this is heavily lifted from Jay Galbraith's work, and in fairness to Jay, he's written a number of books. I think his most recent one was 2008, so it's not like he stopped in the 70s, but a lot of his work is still steeped in what I kind of think of as legacy mindset. So he still thinks very much in tree-shaped hierarchies for companies. That's not bad, because I'm guessing most of you guys work in tree-shaped hierarchies. That's fair. So, but he also has a very, not prescriptive, it's a very mechanistic view of these orgs. So he sees them as tree-shaped hierarchies. He talks a lot about vertical and lateral things that need to happen, and that's not bad. I just think it can limit how we think about the problem. Anyway, so he also leaves out this kind of the human systems aspect of it. He does talk about people, but it's a very process-oriented version of people. So anyways, I kind of call out my own stuff. I want to go through this real quick because we only have enough time to touch on 2 of these points. So the gist of most organization design stuff is that there's a bunch of things that have to balance, and it should be in service to strategy. So your company should have a strategy. Does everybody here have a company strategy? Do you work at a company that has a strategy? Do you know what it is? Yeah, that's actually a huge problem. But there's also this thing called an ethos. Who's heard of company ethos? A couple people? So it's kind of a new idea, but to me, it's the modeled behavior from the leadership. It is what is. Now, a lot of times an ethos will be reflected at a company in terms of a value statement or a set of principles. The problem is a lot of times the bullshit that gets hung up on the wall may or may not be the actual ethos of the company. So the thing about ethos, there's 2 key things about what I think an ethos means. It's what actually is. It's the theory and practice, not just the espoused theory of how we will treat humans, how we will do work, and kind of what our moral or ethical compass is for how we will go about achieving strategy. But the other thing is it's definitely the company's ethos. Meaning, if you move or remove or different leaders come in and out, they are definitely more the pickle, not the brine. So some type of collective thing happens when we get people together in this company, winds up having this personality of its own that tends to mold people to it rather than people mold the company. Does that make sense? You guys have probably all experienced that to some extent. Has anybody ever been part of a CEO change at a medium-sized or larger company? And who met the CEO or heard the CEO say amazing, wonderful things on day 1 or week 1? And then a year later, you're like, yeah, nothing's changed. Yeah, that's why the peasants didn't care who was the king, because they're like, eh. Is that depressing? That's how you buy a farm. Work with the soil. I have a tractor and I literally move shit. It's the best metaphor I have for executive consulting. Anyhow, so these are sort of orders of impact, order of power. So the idea, who's heard the quote, structure follows strategy? You heard that? So the idea is very simple, that you figure out what your strategy is, and your structure needs to follow that. You need to have an organizational structure that will align and help you achieve your strategy. Sort of makes sense. There's a dude named Stephen Bungay, and he talks about, this is horrible, he talks about strategy deployment, which is separate from strategy design. It's another key business process in terms of how we get what we want the strategy to be balanced and deployed all the way out throughout the organization. Anyways, he says structure will eat strategy for breakfast. And the problem with structure is you're usually either changing your strategy or trying to change your structure in the context of a current structure, right? Unless you're founding the company and deciding what structure you want to be from scratch, you're in the thing. The problem is your current structure and your current reward systems will often work against anything that's too progressive with regards to the existing structure, the existing reward systems. Because the structure and rewards have put people in power that are good in the current structure and reward system. Kind of makes sense, right? So I don't know, are you guys becoming despondent? I actually have a whole other talk on despondency, which is kind of funny. These are the most lower order factors, not lowest order meaning least important. It's just these are definitely more the pickle than the brine again. So as these things get defined, our key business processes and our people talent development management systems, those will tend to respond more to these stimuli than the other way around. Have you guys sort of seen that? Things like HR policies or your quarterly business reviews or how you do product or project planning, like those kinds of things tend to follow these a lot more than these things force. All right, so the day-long workshop, if you're ever interested in that, email me. It covers all of these things, and it helps the company balance all these things together. We're really going to talk about structure and rewards today, because that's, you guys all seen the Trevor Noah show? Nobody got time for that, or ain't got time for that. All right, so structure is pretty straightforward. It's how we define our work groups. It's how we define the roles that those groups need to do the work they're going to do. And very explicitly, and this is kind of where me and Jay separate, is it's the connections between the groups. I see companies as webs. I see companies as networks. And I kind of like the idea that it doesn't matter if you keep drawing it like a tree, like your typical org map. It doesn't matter. It's still a freaking web, because that's how reality. Who's ever heard of the latte network? Like, who do you gotta buy a latte for to get your shit done? Like, who's heard that? So it's, you guys all have this thing. There's people that you need to work with that are outside your chain of command that you have to work with to get done. And it goes great when they feel aligned or they're your friend and they're gonna help you out. And it sucks when any of that's not true. And we're gonna look at how to figure that out. Rewards. Who loves rewards?
Yep.
Yeah. Are you always a 5 at work or a star performer? Who ever gets ranked a 3? Meeting expectation. Your boss will tell you that's good. That's fine. You're a 3. Anyways, when we think about our reward systems, we need to think that they can be explicit, like your rating and ranking, like your bonus, like your comp, like your promotions are very explicit rewards. But there's implicit rewards, and you guys have probably seen that. Like, who gets to work with the cool group? Or who gets to work with the cool tech, or who gets to work on the cool project? That's not a promotion, that's not dollars in your pocket, but they are generally seen as rewards. When we think about reward systems, we have to think about the dark side of that. So there are things that can be punishment, punitive, or at least things that we want to distance or disassociate ourselves from. Like at the company that I learned to hate my job at first, I wasn't in it, but I had a friend of mine who was like, oh, I'm getting put into the grease trap department. There was a department that literally everybody called the grease trap department. And everybody knew that it was all those people that just had been meeting expectations for so many years, they were never going to be better than that. And for whatever HR reason, it was legally easier to keep them in the grease trap department than it was to fire them. There were literally a department full of people. It had to be close to 500 heads that worked in the grease trap department. And it was a whole department, meaning like it had an assistant vice president, and multiple directors and managers and senior managers, I mean, full of people that everyone, and they all knew it. Everyone in the grease trap department knew it was called the grease trap department. They didn't give a shit. It was horrible. And then obviously, this is just sort of systems thinking. Obviously, hopefully our reward systems have our intended consequences. Like, I'm going to incent you with a bonus, and you're going to give me, because I've got a carrot right here. It's tricky though when that carrot becomes the stick. Anyways, that's how they got Mr. Red to talk, though. Anyways, but rewards, any systems will always, always, always have unintended consequences. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. It just means there's going to be ripple effects that we didn't think about when we made these systems put in place. Make sense? All right. So we're going to go through a handful of tools. Like I said, I don't have enough time to cover all of them. I have about 5 or 6 that I really love to use, and we're going to go through just a small few. So a quick little rewards analysis canvas, something that I hate calling this, but I have to nowadays, the customer-centric VSM. The irony is deep in that one. And something called an organization net map. Who's heard of any of these? No one should have heard of the first one because I made that one because I didn't have a tool and I needed to make one. All right, we'll jump into these. So this is mine. It's free. It's licensed, whatever. Everybody can use it, reproduce it, whatever. I made this because there was literally nothing out there that I could find that helped me facilitate a company figuring out what its rewards were and what they were trying to do. So I don't necessarily think it's magical. I know this is almost impossible to read. The parts that I think are really kind of cool is I want people to break up, you know, if you're bringing your executive team together or management team together or just any group of people that work at the same company, give them to brainstorm what you think the explicit things are, and then what are some of the implicit incentives and how that goes. All we're trying to do is get a view of the world. At this point, we're just trying to understand the nature of the system, not necessarily make any particular change. And you can work through the other aspects of the canvas, but the other thing that I really like about this canvas, the part that I really have found impacts clients the most, is usually the, well, there's short-term and long-term impacts of the unintended consequences. Who's ever been given a spot award for staying late to fix a problem? Money, cash money, spot award, gift visa, a couple people. Who's been recognized publicly by manager, senior manager for staying late to fix a problem? Think that's cool? I'm not gonna say it's cool or not, but it does have unintended consequences. Anybody here a working mom? He asked knowingly. What if mom has to leave by 4 every day to get her kid, but she comes in at 6 every day because that's, you know, hubby's taking the kid in daycare. She wants to do great work and she does great work 9 to 5, but she can't ever stay late. And you could say he instead of she. It could be role reversed, so sorry, that was a little sexist on my part. But, you know, here we've created, through a reward system, something that may not be as inclusive as we want to be. And my whole shtick is being intentional. So I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do that. I just want you to realize that when you routinely reward that person that has to stay late, there might be this unintended consequence of people that just have a limiting factor where they routinely can't do this thing that gets routinely rewarded. They feel less about themselves, or what's worse is when this starts trickling over into the implicit. Because managers, I don't know if you've ever met a manager, having been one, you never know. You see that person sitting over there working late, and I'll say he. And the reason I'll say he is because it's oftentimes that 20-something young man that has the ability to stay late. Very often. And I see them working late. And I'm a manager, so, you know, I know that I have to work a 60-hour week because that's what my asshole boss wants to see, so I should be not a 3. And I see that person working late, and again, and again. And you guys know how marketing works. I just need to get my logo in front of you enough that I'm top of mind and you make a decision. Well, when that decision is, who am I going to promote? Who's a hard worker? Who's going to do their best job for me? Yeah. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, and I'm not saying that they necessarily do bad work, and I'm not saying that all managers make that decision, but it is definitely a factor that I've seen multiple times, that people that send the emails after 6 p.m., who's seen that? Who looks at that timestamp and is like, 1 a.m.? Seriously, go to freaking come on. But it happens, right? And I've seen, like CEOs especially, I think the further up that tier of kind of weird social mindset, the worse it gets. So here's a couple of crazy things. These are low-hanging fruit in terms of meaning if they can change, they will have almost immediately generally positive impacts on your company, not low-hanging fruit as in they're easy to change. So we've known about this particular one since the 50s. A dude named Edward Deming told us this when he was helping Toyota co-create Lean after World War II. I want that to sink in a little bit. 1950s. We've known this. This means if I'm going to give you performance feedback and I'm going to say you did or didn't meet your goals, or you're good or not at meeting your goals, that should not be coupled to Your compensation. Who works in a system that does this right now? Curious. That decouples it. You?
They say they do.
Yeah, but,
Maybe a
but,
review and then they get the raise.
right, the
If
one
you
meeting,
don't get it on the same day.
there has to be 2 weeks between those meetings.
Oh, so it's a 2 weeks that makes them decoupled.
Right, so it's
You don't
completely
get the raise
decoupled.
in the meeting.
Yes,
Right,
you should
right.
completely forget that performance meeting, yeah.
How clever of them.
It's a complete fraud.
That obfuscates it completely. If you're getting ranked, if there's a fixed amount of money, there is a bell curve, just math, it's just how it has to happen. And it's worse when they have internal policies that make that a zero-sum game, meaning if I'm gonna give somebody more money, then I have to take it from somebody else. Nordstrom's does that still to this day. I can talk about them because they're not my client anymore. So bonus similar. In fact, if you think about the implication of what the first one means, if your company does bonuses, usually one of two things happen. If you're getting a bonus, you get it so often and it's within a tolerable range that you really just consider it part of your salary. Yeah, if that's the case, you're probably underpaid. Your salary, your base salary is probably below market value, probably. Or it's about average for market value. Either way, your two choices, if you want to try to apply this to bonuses, you either get rid of bonuses, and if getting rid of bonuses means people think they're taking a pay cut, then raise people's pay. That's pay people in alignment with how you see fair market salaries, and just get rid of bonuses. But if you want to have bonuses truly be icing on the cake, then just set it up like profit sharing. You're freaking out. What's happening? What's going on?
I work in a nonprofit, so.
Perfect. So there's no profit sharing.
There's
Are there
no
bonuses?
raise, there's no bonus,
Yeah, but you know, you get the reward of saving something. In fairness, there's a very fine line between self-employed and nonprofit sometimes, so I feel your pain. My farm is nonprofit for 2 years running. Create level-based pay systems. Some people call this ladder-based or rung-based. Has anybody heard of this? So the idea is like within a role, you might have something like a junior, mid-level, senior, but for every role there is a salary. There's a point salary. You know, if you're level 1, you get paid 50 grand, level 2, you get 90, level 3, you get 120 or whatever. And everybody at the same level gets paid the same amount of money. And that's just how it is. In order to, the mechanics to make that work aren't just that simple. There's a couple things you'll notice that usually the actual dollar amounts in comp between, say, a level 1 and a level 2, between the levels, are pretty chunky. When I help companies design these, I usually like those to be around $10,000 to $20,000 in steps. So they're fairly significant, especially if you think about it in terms of a percentage base. It's usually a lot bigger than what most people get for a pay raise on their annual review. The other part is you need to have clearly objective, demonstrable goals that you can do to show that you're at level 2 or whatever. And that's usually why they need to hire a consultant, is because going through that process can be very tricky, because especially as you go into things like, I want to be a programmer on a cross-functional development team. What does that mean? Does that mean that every developer just knows a lot of developing things? But man, what about being cross-functional? How does that work? But does that mean I need to learn a little bit about front-end and back-end? What about UX? What about test? What about businessy things? What about producty things, right? So figuring out where you want to require a specialty, or where you want to see progression, but you don't want to restrict what that specialization's in. Maybe I'm not interested in UX, but I am super interested in quality assurance and testing. So maybe it's okay, given that's not my specialty, that I can choose between those two things to learn a little bit in, and I'm still generalizing out while continuing in my specialization. So that's the gist of how you design those. The trick is then, how do you make those demonstrable? How do you know that you can do a thing? And really, all jobs should be defined that way anyways, because right now, most of the time, we promote people based on role by something like years you've been doing it, which we all know is bullshit, and some amount of like popularity contest. If we're being honest, those are the two things, is years and popularity, and that's how you get promotions within the company. Yes?
Is this suggesting level-based pay system like agnostic to role or department? So like,
that's a good question. So usually you would want your level-based pay by role, because there's gonna, like, if you pay like programmers very separately from marketing people, there's going to be a huge disparity in what there's fair market salaries for both those people. As you get closer in context, so like one of the things that I got a lot of flack for when I went in-house as a head of the whole product team was I wanted to pay my programmers and testers and designers all the same salary. And because we needed to be able to be competitive for good programmers, that means they all got paid programmer salary. And programmers were the most expensive of those 3 roles. So I caught a lot of flack because they're like, we were blowing up the budget. And I'm like their team members, because I wanted to take this like, you're a Marine first. It doesn't matter if you're a sniper or a cook. You're a development team. Well, but that had to dovetail with my philosophy of like, I want to start learning a little bit about these generalizations. I want my UX people to start learning a little bit about front-end dev, you know. And I also have to take all these other systems to make sure that I accommodate that, because that's the hard part of being a manager in this context, is it actually makes you have to be a freaking manager, right? Because I can't just tie your perks to comp. I have to actually give you meaningful performance. I actually have to guide you on this path. And I might not be the best equipped to do that. If I'm a dev manager because I was a senior engineer who turned to the dark side, who the hell am I to have advice to a UX person? I actually learned UX from Alan Cooper, so I might be okay. But anyways, so this actually leads right into that. I might be an asshole, but actually I can attest to that. My wife will definitely tell you that is true. But maybe consider a no bosses culture. Now I'll freely admit that I use the word consider in this because almost every place that, literally every place that I've had as a client is not ready for this. But it's still a great mental game for you to think through. Because there's things that bosses currently do. When I say boss, I literally mean a human in charge of another human. It's modernized slavery to some extent. Or maybe just indentured servitude, that was a little better. So, you know, the idea is that there's still things that need to happen. You know, if someone starts a fist fight, someone probably needs to be fighting, right? If we still need to do coaching, we still need to do development. But just because I'm good at managing a dev team, does that mean I'm a great people coach mentoring person for all the roles that are on my dev team? That's freaking insane, right? So we can start saying, well, what other structures or teams or functions would our organization need as a whole to still do these things? Hire people, fire people, coach people, mentor people. How can we design a system that does that without having to have a human in charge of another human? All these things, by the way, can also interstitch together. In fact, they work together wonderfully when a company can do all of these things. Right. I hate calling this a customer-centric VSM because a value stream map used to mean customer, but now it just means somebody had to do a process map on a whiteboard. The number of VSMs that I see that don't have customers is sad, so I specifically say customer. So when we facilitate this, we start by brainstorming who do we think are all of our customers and users. This is a great group, I hope, that you know that those are different people. Sometimes. Not always, but they can be different. A lot of times they go to like dev conferences or like product or project management conferences and they're like, what? I'm like, well, do you use Facebook? Yeah. Do you pay for it? Not directly. So then you just map out your workflow activities. Has anybody done like this? This is just a flow chart, right? So this is kind of what are all the steps that it takes from where does work come into the system. That's usually what these dots recommend. A box is a process or an activity. I still use this. This is usually something like a diamond. I don't want to get too much into what the VSM aspect is to it. You can use this to identify, Lean uses to identify areas of waste. Where do we spend a lot of time? You can put things like min, median, and max times between them. You can figure out what's the time that work wastes before it can get processed. So that's like lead times and queues. So you can actually do a lot of process improvements type work, Kaizen projects and things like that, by doing a value stream map of a process where there's an endpoint delivery and figuring out what your waste is. So there's a whole other talk about value stream mapping. But the other part that I really like to do, especially with regards to like where does development get its work from, because usually when we do these, we forget that there's a whole like, we should validate our assumptions about what product we're building, right? I love going to DevOps conferences. I had this, have you guys all seen the I Love Lucy where she's eating the chocolates? And I've got it, but I've replaced all the chocolates with those little poop emojis. And I'm like, look, it's continuous delivery without product validation. It might not all be true, but we don't know. We don't know because we're not validating. Anyways, so to that end, we should also add how we're interfacing with what people that we think of as our customers, and what market sensing mechanisms that we have along the way. And then just sort of like the other stuff, we should label where those interactions happen and what we're doing with that information. So it all kind of works together to make a system. The problem with these kinds of charts, these kinds of diagrams, is they're very process oriented. They don't necessarily tell us which people are involved with this. So, excuse me, that's where this kind of org net map comes in. Who's done mind mapping before? Anybody mind map out ideas, talks, or groups? A couple people? Mind map's super useful tools. It's basically a mind map, meaning we're going to have nodes and like connections between nodes. But in terms of drawing one out, I kind of want to give you a couple facilitation tips. So I never use the circles, but imagine there's kind of concentric circles, and we're going to plot out like an org or some sub part of an org. As you kind of go from the outside in, kind of consider these higher order functions of authority. So like a CEO might go smack dab in the middle, right? A dev team or individual contributors maybe fall on the outside. The only reason I mention this is going to make drawing this easier. It's going to be messy anyways, but it's going to make drawing it easier. The other part is, as you start kind of mind mapping and brainstorming the parts of your organization, if they feel closely related in function, like a lot of times you see like product management and marketing go close together, or product and sales, or product and dev, just try to make those branches closer to each other, because it's going to, again, make the messiness a little bit less messy. And then we're going to connect all these nodes in various different ways. Most org charts only do this, right? Your hierarchy. You're usually like who's boss, right? The value stream map talks about value flow, so we're going to show that in green. But what we want to see is how does value flow through the people system, not through just a set of processes or activities. All right, so let's get started. Boom, hierarchy. So we've got a senior leadership team, product manager, product management. These are probably VPs at this point, VP of engineering, VP of product, head of ops, head of sales. So far, so good. Seems like a typical enterprise structure. Product has a launch team, user experience design group, user experience research team. So far, so good. Engineering, we've got release, we've got kind of new product development, we've got a maintenance squad, and a PMO. By the way, I'm not advocating this is a good model. This is actually a slightly simplified version of a former client. So, operations has customer support, and they had a triage group that kind of customer support would intake, and then triage would decide how important it was, and then do some stuff with it. And then sales, this was interesting. Marketing actually reported into sales, because this company considered marketing sales enablement, which I thought was an interesting take on marketing. And there were sales directors that tended to stay at HQ, and then the reps do what reps do, right? Point operator people go out in the world. So far, it just looks like all we really have is sort of a messy version of an org chart, right? Looks like some kind of weird squid. Let's start tracing value. So if we kind of think what that value stream map looked like, so we have to add that customer back in now. So user research and the marketing team through marketing research would interact with the market or the users, and they would create value by giving validated ideas back to the senior leadership team to help form a strategy. Senior leadership team through the VP of product would kind of help deploy strategy downstream. This is kind of after we did it. Before it was just this weird shit show of everything. But we channeled most of the strategy through product. Product through things like product owners and product managers would work directly with dev teams to actually build features. Dev would then work with release, who would then work with a launch team. Launch generally coordinated with things like marketing and sales and support to do all the go-to-market stuff. And then they would release. So kind of we release through launch to the customer, and this is our value path. Now, the funny thing is, without any of the other connections so far, just from the lines you see, who thinks there could possibly be just a little org dysfunction?
Okay.
Where do you see that?
Why is there redundancy in the lines?
Yeah. Well, redundancy? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you have possibly two paths. Sorry, I'm a data architect, so I look at paths.
Yeah.
There are two paths between two different nodes. Why is that?
Sure. Well, one thing you might know is hierarchy, especially in most hierarchical tree-based systems, also tends to dictate reward. Which means we've got a path for rewarding that is not aligned with value creation. I'm sure you guys have never experienced designers that don't always get along with the dev team, or a dev team that doesn't get along with IT ops, or marketing that doesn't get along with sales, or sales that doesn't get along with product, right? Interesting stuff. So the next thing we do is we start taking a look at, there's another little branch of value where customer support calls in, goes to support, goes to triage, goes into a PMO to get prioritized to a maintenance team because they're overworked and underpaid. And then they follow the path back out through launch or through release and then out to the customer. So when I look at this, even before we get into dependencies, just the idea that there's different flows, meaning different things that are not aligned to value that we're going to get. It doesn't necessarily mean that hierarchy and value flow have to be the same. I would recommend it is, but it doesn't have to be if we can truly not care about hierarchy and only care about value delivery. And in theory, that's what a company should care about. It doesn't matter who's boss, it just matters, are we generating value by making a customer happy, right? One of our 3 things that great products do. Dependencies, I'm not gonna go through all of them, but these become even crazier, right? Because at least the value flow, there was some kind of hop-to-hop connectivity. These feel like there's crazy random stuff, like launch is dependent on customer support, right? That kind of makes sense. Launch and marketing, launch should be product and sales directors, right? This is interesting because we have here a handoff, dev to release, but there's also a dependency. So a work dependency isn't just a handoff. The handoff is usually a green arrow. A dependency usually means I'm blocked on my work until I get something back from you to keep my work going forward. This probably means they've gone back and forth a little bit before they can actually come through the green arrow. So dependencies, who's heard of things like optimal team sizes, Scrum team size, 7 plus or minus 2, or 2 pizza teams? I'll tell you, a 2 pizza team with me on it's completely host. I can eat like a 20-inch around. But, or maybe I am a 2 pizza team. That's how good I am. I can eat 2 pizzas. All that is bullshit. It's myth. It's based on, so the 7 plus or minus 2 is based off some childhood psych stuff that they researched after the fact because that's what they did at Chrysler when they invented Scrum. It has nothing to do with actual adults doing creative product delivery at all. At least that's what I heard. What I found from some research that was done by one company that did a couple of surveys, it was Rally, the big agile product management software. They found that there was no significant difference between team sizes of 3 and 15. And usually what wound up happening, what was more of an impact than team size was dependencies and assholes. Doesn't matter if you have an asshole in a team of 3 or a team of 15. I guess your likelihood of having an asshole is bigger if you have more people, but maybe we just don't hire assholes and team size is fine. But anyways, something to think about. Who's read that? There's like the no asshole rule book. It's great. Anyways, friction. So friction is any kind of impedance mismatch between 2 groups. I would say 90% of the time, in my experience, friction comes from goals. The reason that design and dev usually have friction between them is because designers are incented and rewarded either as individuals or as teams to come up with really great designs, they do this thing, and they don't always get a chance to make sure that they can be feasible. Even when we can make sure they're feasible, sometimes we don't have the time to do it that the product or project manager want us to do it in. So there's all these things, but it comes down to local incentives are driving behavior one way, and another group's local incentives is driving another one. Security teams, I love those guys, because we want our apps to be secure. But the most secure server in the world is the one with no software on it, right? So when a security team is incented to prevent new features from getting on a box, and dev teams are incented to get new features on a box, how does that work? Not well is how it works. So these are some examples of friction that were in this organization. So there was some different incentives, as you kind of might imagine, between sales directors and product managers. Specifically, these guys were really incented to validate stuff and try to drive towards product market fit. These guys were, incented based on quarterly sales. Did I get this customer who wanted this thing? There was always disunification between those things. User experience research, we were talking about this earlier, Felicia, but user experience research and market research. There was a huge conflict between how to go about doing that work. Market research would do some initial first pass and then a whole bunch of like MBA grad analysis number crunching, and then just say, here's the set of features that's going to open up this addressable market for us. And these guys would come in and say, well, we don't know that. You basically did a whole bunch of cursory data analysis, and that might be a wonderful experiment. That might be enough to say, hey, let's go do some research. But instead of saying, hey, we think this might be a good market to go into, you user researchers go start doing user research, they just say, go into this market, it's worth this many billions of dollars, here's the features they want, go get it. They tell these people to go draw pretty pictures. I'm sure you guys have never seen that. So, I don't know, who thinks this looks messy? This is super sanitized. This is very clean. Although, as you go through these, I'm kind of curious, because I asked this when I actually go through a real facilitation of this with the people in the company. If you were joining a company, if you were a new hire, and even the level that I just walked you guys through it today, would you rather be handed something like this and walk through it with your new boss? Or would you rather be handed an org chart and walk through that with your boss?
Org chart.
The org chart? Instead of this? All right.
I think in terms of, I think this can be overwhelming to a new
If it's
hire.
walked through with you, okay, that's right. That's the first for me. Although, maybe at a conference. Everyone that I've ever talked to said they wish they knew this when they were a new hire, because this tells them how their work's going to actually work. So again, this doesn't tell you necessarily what to change or how to change. There's some areas in here where if you kind of see where there's friction, where there's dependencies, you get ideas. So this just tells us what is the current state of the swamp. If we want to drain the swamp, we've got a couple things that we can think about doing. So there's a handful of structural considerations when we take a look at that net map that we can think about. The first one is the hierarchy. So again, if you can do a no bosses thing, great. In my opinion, in most companies that do knowledge or thought work, bosses at best do nothing, and probably more often than not harm the system. I think we're seeing more and more evidence of that as we start actually studying